So a year ago, I was watching PBS NewsHour and saw Omran Daknish, the little boy in the back of the red Jeep. His house had just been hit by an airstrike, and he was sitting in the back, 5 years old, talking to the reporter camera guy nonstop. The reporter was talking to him. He said very little, but then the reporter said, you've been hurt. And he said, yes. And he said, you're not crying. And he said, no, I've taught myself not to cry. I turned off the TV. I did not want to see any more of that story. 2 months later, I saw the story about 20,000 refugee children who had been turned out of school in Southern Europe because it was infringing on the children, the children that were normally going to those schools and impacting them, and the teacher was overworked, etc. So they expelled 20,000 of those school children, and I thought, okay, I have a teaching degree. At least I could teach 2 or 3 of those children somewhere in the world. I ended up going to France. First I asked Reverend Cindy. First I asked my husband, then Reverend Cindy, what they thought of the idea. They strongly encouraged me, and from that moment on, I started preparing to go to France. Sold the house, etc. But I wanted to start with thanking this group. You do not comprehend, I am sure, how important your support and your prayers and your encouragement have been. So thank you. And there are so many of you. It's not just 1 or 2 to name. It is this whole congregation. So thank you. And the refugees, thank you. And Pastor Liddy, who I'll talk about, thanks you. So my day, my week, my month, every day, I start at this tea table. I have a 3-story apartment in a little medieval village, and I start at this tea table, and I meditate and pray for about 20 minutes every morning. I don't think my life would be the same without this little activity. Just a brief little activity, but it is so important. I get asked quite often 3 questions. And the 3 questions are, how has my life changed? This meditation spot has made me feel more free, to be more direct, to waste less time, to get on with it. I get asked, what are the refugees like? Do you ever feel threatened by them? I ask, and the last one is, what's GSWow doing now? Have you a plan going forward? So those are the 3 questions I'm going to address. One of the parishioners here, your official photographer, Alyssa, was talking to Arnold. Well, Arnold and Conrad were talking one day and with Lissa, and they were talking about perhaps she could do something. And on that spot, she decided to come over to France. The 2 of us were talking. She was still here in the States, and we were talking. And I said, Lissa, we're going to start Global Schools Without Walls. We're just going to start. I went end of February. This was now September. So I'd spent an awful long time just hitting different walls. Finally, I found this prayer room that Pastor Liddy offered to let us use until our storage room turned into our headquarters for GSWow. So Lissa took this picture. This young woman stood up at DK Live one Sunday and shared how she had been tortured, left for dead, and very grateful to God that she was still alive. They're making tool boards to outline the tools so we can track and keep track of every tool. This is Pastor Liddy. She is planning on coming over sometime and thanking you for sharing me. So she is a phenomenal woman, Swiss, speaks English perfectly, and French, of course. And she is the woman Arnold encouraged me to contact. And finally, I got a hold of her, and we just hit it off perfectly. This was the end of July, and she said, okay, Helen, I am chair of this resale shop, and they have a storage room you can convert to your design studio for GSWow. And I was overjoyed. I mean, I was in seventh heaven. She said, just write up a proposal, and I'll take it to my committee, and I'm sure they will approve it, and you'll be off and running. So I did that. I typed it up. I sent it off to her about 3 or 4 days later. Nothing. And I waited for a week. Nothing. I waited for 2 weeks. I went back to my tea table and said, all right, God, what's up? Because this seemed like a really good idea. 3rd week, I wrote to her again and said, all right, did you get my proposal? You know, maybe it didn't arrive for some reason. Nothing. And I got invited to a beach party, and I sent her one last email and said, okay, I am going to be at a beach party just 2 blocks from where you are. I'd like to meet with you. And I get a response back, and she said, perfect. Come in. You can have from 6 to 7 tonight. And that was perfect because my beach party started at 7. So I went. I was sitting in my car outside of DK Live, and I thought, all right, I think I'm going to get a Dear John. I don't think she's interested. I could just call her now and say, you know, I understand your committee said no. I'm not going to deal with that. I didn't do that. I did go in and talk to her. It was like we had never been apart. She saw me and she says, oh, Helen, I'm so excited about your program. And I said, but it's been 3 or 4 weeks and you haven't responded. She said, well, it's August. Everybody goes on vacation in August. All the time I was waiting, I went out to the jungle. It's a nature park just outside of Grand Cinque. The camp where there were covered facilities for the refugees to sleep in burned. It was quite a tragic thing. And so then they're sleeping outside in the nature park. And they are warm, kind, generous people, same as here in St. James the Great. God does not make junk, nor refugees who have suffered as much as they have are unbelievably kind and have taught me kindness. They're also about the age of our grandchildren. This is the storage room. It was filled with old refrigerators and appliances that the resale shop had been donated and had no use for it, so they kept filling up this storage room. It took us about 6-7 weeks to clear that out, to get electricity. We didn't have any electricity there. And moving forward, that now is our headquarters, and they are adding, the refugees are building on a bathroom, because we also didn't have bathroom facilities. Here's, here's a young man, very gregarious, very handsome young man, and he's typical of the refugees. They're not really that young. High percentage are married, have children, and have left their country. A lot of them because of religious persecution. Everyone in our group that is now part of GSWow has left their old country because of persecution, religious persecution. And they want to bring their families over. This is our first refugee who applied for asylum. We require that they apply to become French citizens, apply for asylum, learn French. They study French 2 hours every day. It's just so important that they can speak the language of the country. It caused a great deal of rivalry, jealousy when we got our first one, because a bunch of them had agreed not to take part. He stepped forward and became our first one. After that, it led the way for other refugees to do the same thing. These are thin slices of wood. So we're at this resale shop in their old storage room, and they have a lot of donations to the resale shop, particularly furniture that is broken and they can't use anymore, or sell or repair easily. So it goes out to the dump. It goes right by our design studio, and the refugees, the designers that are part of GSWow, look at everything that goes by and assesses it, and they check to make sure it's solid wood, and then they slice it. This is a cafeteria table. They took about 10 cafeteria tables apart, took the linoleum off the top, sliced it, and the idea is to make tables like this or similar, and we're in the process of designing different buffet tables and coffee tables and side tables to sell for their pocket money and to add to their resume. Our idea is we must get them employable and hopefully on their own with their own endeavor and enterprise, because that will be an easier path, we think, than trying to apply for a job and have a certain amount of paperwork that may be difficult. So that's the idea. That's what we've done now. Going forward, 48 hours, less than 48 hours, before I got on the plane to come back to California, Pastor Liddy had been telling me for 2 or 3 months about a piece of property that I should see. And I said, I want to see it. Finally, I mean, Pastor Liddy is unbelievably busy. Reverend Cindy can attest to that as well. She consults almost 24/7, the same as any priest, right? So she had been telling me about this piece of property. And I wrote her, or I sent her a text saying, Pastor Liddy, in 48 hours, I'm leaving for the plane. Am I going to see the property or not? She says, Helen, I've got it arranged. I don't know when, but I've got it arranged. A day goes by, and I saw her, and I said, time's up. She says, it's in about 3 hours. Do you have time? I said, I have time. So we went out to see a monastery. This was started in 1767. It was a monastery up until the 90s, and 28 bedrooms, 28 bathrooms, and had been a beautiful facility. It was converted to a restaurant and hotel. Then it hit hard times, and about 10 years ago, it was vacant, went back to the mayor of this little village of 1,800 people, and was vandalized. All the plumbing fixtures, all the kitchen appliances, all the toilets, wiring, etc., have been pulled. They didn't damage anything when they pulled them out. So I don't know who supervised that. But once those were out, then then the vandalism and broken windows occurred. But that's fairly superficial. What we'd like to do with this facility is buy it. It's being sold for about $245,000 US, and will cost probably another $600,000-700,000. No, I don't think it'll cost $600,000. And I have two rough estimates to put it back together. In the process, I think we can convert, of those 28 bedrooms, 12 into studios for the refugees. And one of the reasons we must buy it, because as owner, we're not going to be limited as to who can work there. It is very difficult to find anyone to rent any space to house the refugees. Pastor Liddy has the highest respect in her community across northern France. But even she has had difficulty convincing people to rent. So it is a problem. And as you saw the nature park, that had a foot of snow on it a couple weeks ago. So it is tough. So we think we can convert this monastery. It has a Monet, It has a Monet garden. Americans donated, when it was first a monastery, they donated these trees. It comes with history. I have all the history from 1767 to today. I mean, Americans are bonkers over this sort of thing, right? So I am excited. I am hoping we can buy it, and plan on doing that. If anyone is interested in helping us as an investor, we have two-pronged plan. One, to make money with this monastery. It can be converted. There's a 65-year moratorium on converting it to any kind of residences, but we plan on making it into a global conference center, which is allowed, or a one-stop venue for a French country wedding for the next couple years. But in 2 years, the moratorium goes away, and our son plans in 6 years to come over. He is a general contractor building a 5-story condo facility now in Capitol Hill in Seattle. He'll be available to come over, and we'll see what happens then. But so that is a corporation, or we're going to have an LLC. The other part is charity, to try and get these refugees established and provide for themselves. Just the same as we started with Conrad and our family approving of this wild venture of mine, they also continued by giving me a designer welding helmet for Christmas. It is approved by the Welding Union Association, so it is good. One of the things that we may do also is on this beautiful facility grounds is take a couple of containers, and I spoke earlier this week to a gentleman in France who is going to sell us a couple of shipping containers, making one into a hothouse and the other into an épicerie for selling vegetables and fruits and flowers, and experimenting with vertical gardens. So thus the welding helmet, I think, will come into good use. So that's the end.
Thank you, Helen. I'll get you some questions for Helen, but I have to tell you that the funny thing is about 3 months ago, I got a call from Helen. I'm relaxing, it's summer. And she goes, she doesn't say hi, Cindy. She goes, do you think I could learn to weld? I'm like, hi, Helen. And she's FaceTiming me. I actually used to weld. So I go, you could learn, but it's, not easy. So there you go. She's going to be learning how to weld. You too can learn how to weld. I also want to say thank you for sharing this, because so dear to my heart that you took the gospel message, go into the world. And you have. And I would say I would like to support you through this ministry, to continue our prayers and support. But more importantly, Helen, I'm just so proud of you. I'm just so proud of you. So.
One of the things that happens through my guardian angel is my cherub seems to put people in my organization or contact that I really need. Like Alyssa coming over and telling the story about GSWow. Arnold finding Pastor Liddy for me, because without that connection, one of her friends came up from southern France to talk to me about the program, because he was interested. He's trying to do something in southern France for refugees. He said, you don't realize, but Pastor Liddy is 1 in a million. That very, very few people could do what she has tried to do for the refugees. There's anger out there. We're aware of that, right? And Julie Delespress is a very new friend. A friend of mine introduced me to her, living in Arizona. She is fluent in several languages and is going to come over 1st of February to France to teach our GSWow refugees French. I mean, that's just such a godsend. I can't believe this young architect. I met a young woman when I took one of the refugees to the asylum interview. A young Muslim girl was sitting there with this beautiful silk scarf on, looking like Grace Kelly, and only woman there, so I went over and knew no one else had speak to her and said, hi, I'm Helen Timpe. What is your story? She had been chosen in her country as the top architect student, is finishing her graduate work at the School of Architecture at Lille University. And I said, sweetie, I've got a project for you. And this was on my way to the airplane. So it is serendipitous over and over and over again. I'd suggest you find your own tea table.
Any quick questions for Helen? You were very thorough, I think. Thank you, Helen, for sharing.